And welcome to Whiskey Politics. I'm Dave Sussman, your host and purveyor at whiskeypolitics.net. You can find us at ricochet.com, your favorite podcast application, including iTunes. And if you're enjoying the series, please don't hesitate to give us a 5-star rating as it helps others find us. You can also find our video series on YouTube and on the new network, America's Voice, and that is on Dish, and you will be hopefully finding that pretty soon on some other networks, including DirecTV and Comcast. A lot going on right now in the world, geopolitically speaking, and delighted to have with us today on today's episode, Nonie Darwish. Now, Nonie Darwish founded the group Arabs for Israel. She's an independent, outspoken advocate for reforming Islam's authoritarian ideology, has called for stricter immigration laws on Muslim and Arab immigrants and to stop multiculturalism. Nonie was awarded the Claire Booth Luce Policy Institute's Women of Exceptional Courage Award and is the author of several books, including Now They Call Me Infidel, and her latest book, Wholly Different, Why I Choose Biblical Value Over Islamic Values. Nonie, thank you for having us today.
My pleasure, Dave. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure being here. Now, before we get started, I've done a lot of research on you. You've got multiple books that are out there. To call you controversial is probably somewhat of an understatement, but you, from watching you, fantastic. You are brave, you are courageous, and I can understand why you received that award as far as the Women of Exceptional Courage Award. So just before on the outset, anybody that hasn't watched any of your YouTube, you're out there, you can be watched, you can be seen, as well as your books. So thank you for everything that you're doing.
My pleasure.
So obviously a lot's going on in the world right now. We're talking about the Iran deal. We're talking about Israel. From the standpoint of, before we get into geopolitical events today, I would love for our listeners to get a very good understanding of the disposition of where you are now, but where you came from. Now, as an outspoken advocate for Israel, right? A lot of people wouldn't know this about you, but you were actually born, and we can talk a little bit about this. You were born in Cairo, Egypt.
Yes.
And you grew up in Gaza.
Yes, in the 50s.
Yeah. So how does somebody that comes from that geography, Islamic, raised, your father obviously was fighting for Egypt. Yeah. Talk a little bit about that. What happened as a child that really gave you a perspective on things?
Well, I wasn't aware of my thoughts now. When I was a child, I grew up in Gaza. My father headed the Egyptian military intelligence in Gaza. At that time, Gaza was part of Egypt. Egypt controlled Gaza at that time. And my father headed the Fidayeen operations against Israel. The Fidayeen did not blow themselves up like today. They just went in and caused as much damage, destruction, death, and came back inside Israel. And that lasted for a few years, and Israel was really suffering because they were, their borders were penetrated by Egypt all the time. And they were trying to shoot back, and of course, they were shooting at Israel from residential areas, unfortunately. So I remember as a child hearing the bombing, and I always ran under my bed thinking my bed is going to protect me. So I really lived in the heart of the Arab-Israeli conflict as a child. And I lost my father.
And your father, what was his position in the Egyptian army? What was he doing?
Well, he was the head of the Egyptian military intelligence in Gaza.
Okay.
And the Sinai also.
Right.
And he was doing a lot of operations against Israel under the orders of Gamal Abdel Nasser, the Egyptian president at that time.
And some of those operations were taking out women, children?
Oh, Israeli, of course, families. Mm-hmm. It was against civilians, against anybody.
Now the IRF were fighting, the IDF I should say, were fighting against Egypt and all of their enemies as they do. They have to protect themselves. And your father was killed by the IDF?
By the IDF. Actually, there were several attempts on his life to stop the Fida'in. Israel wanted to stop the Fida'in operations because they were suffering from it. And I remember a few months before he was killed, Israeli commandos came into our home to looking for my father. And by coincidence, my father was not home that night. He was in Cairo. So all they found were women and children. And I really didn't even wake up. I knew about it fully later in life. But I remember I woke up in the morning, my mom was very upset. There's a lot of commotion in the house. My mom didn't tell us that Israeli commandos were in the house looking for my father the night before. And I remember seeing all the security personnel surrounding our home being herded into a truck and taken for interrogation to check who was the traitor who allowed, because they were in the house. Mm-hmm. And my favorite soldier, my favorite security, his name was Abdul Halim. Mm-hmm. He never came back. And I remember he was killed during the interrogation. So it just shows you how horrific Egyptian interrogation is. So I went to Gaza elementary schools, and we learned hatred, vengeance, retaliation. Peace was never discussed. The word peace it's not a value. It's not an Arab value. We don't learn the value of peace. Mm-hmm. We only learn the value of pride in jihad. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That is the main focus of the value system when we are children. Okay. And when you are constantly told as a child that there's some people across this border called Jews, and all they want in life is to kill Arab children, hatred becomes easy. And terrorism against these unknown monsters is even good. Mm-hmm. Who wouldn't want to terrorize a monster? So this is the indoctrination I was brought up with. Mm-hmm. And I think I was, to a large extent, an anti-Semite too. I hated Jews just like all Arab children because I was told they wanted to kill Arab children. Yeah. But when the Israeli commandos came into our home, they never killed us. When they couldn't find my father, they left us unharmed. So that...
The difference is that they are not going after women and children and families.
Exactly, but the Fida'iyyin were after women, children, and families.
Yeah. So your father was killed. How old were you?
8.
You were 8 years old. Okay, young child. Obviously negatively, but how did that impact your mother? You had how many siblings?
We were 5 altogether. 5. I was number 2.
Right.
And after my father was killed in Gaza, we went back to Cairo. And during the funeral, people came to congratulate us that he's now in heaven. So to die as a shaheed was something to be proud of.
Right.
And Gamal Abdel Nasser, the president of Egypt, came to our home to pay condolences. Mm-hmm. And I remember he came in with a big entourage. My mom made us stand in line to greet him. And it was a big honor that the president came to our home. And I remember we were him and his entourage were telling us, which one of you kids will avenge your father's blood by killing Jews? Mm-hmm. So we were so misinformed as children about. My father was responsible for all the Fida'iyyin going in to kill Jews, but we were not told that. I learned that later. Actually, they were proud of it. Oh, Mustafa Hafiz, he killed 1,000. I mean, his men killed 1,000 Jews, which was a bit of an exaggeration. I think it was maximum 400. But Nasser and all the media, Arab media, the way they viewed it was, we are entitled to killing Jews, but Jews are not entitled to kill us.
So you were indoctrinated. All children were indoctrinated. Obviously, the Jews are the infidel, the devil. You want to push them out to the ocean. Understood. But from your personal standpoint, domestic standpoint, how does Islam view a single mother or a widowed mother?
Very, very different. As soon as we went back to Cairo and my father died, I remember my mom, because she was used to having a car with my father, so she bought a car. And as soon as she bought a car, she was criticized as a loose woman by the neighbors, even by some relatives.
A loose woman?
A loose woman.
Okay.
To own a car and drive her kids to school was looked down upon as a loose woman, like somebody, oh, she's not proper. So I remember my mom one time was crying, and she was saying, isn't it enough that they take our husbands as a shaheed, as the great shaheed, but we are left without any respect to live our lives without being called names. So that was the first time I realized that being a woman under Islam, there is no respect. Especially the wives of a jihadist who died for the cause, and his wife is criticized for driving a car.
So you were 8, 9, 10 years old. You were a little girl.
Yeah.
Okay. Something was off for you. You were indoctrinated. Your father was killed by Israel, by the IDF. I mean, who better than a poster child for hatred towards Jews and Judaism in Israel?
And I was.
Than the daughter of a martyr. So where was this conflict in you? How did that occur? I mean, eventually you moved back to Cairo. You said that you went to a Catholic school, correct?
Yeah, my daughter, at that time, Egyptians who wanted good education, they sent their kids to British schools. And those British schools were Catholic, run by Catholic nuns. Yeah. And
I did the same living in England, by the way, as a child, and I'm Jewish.
Yes.
I had to go to Christmas Mass and the whole thing.
So right. if you but see when it was time for Mass for the Christians, the class was Christian Egyptians, half was Muslim. And we went to study the Quran. Okay. At that time. Okay. And in our Quran, we were calling non-Muslims infidels and evil and bad. And I remember looking at the nuns who were so good to us. In my mind as a child, said, but they are good. They're good to us. They even told my mom, we'll pray for you. So I started doubting. I started feeling like the picture is not fully honest here.
And you knew this. You knew this based upon your personal interactions, just looking around you, friends and teachers, people that you respected. You were being taught one thing and you were feeling something different.
But it wasn't totally my... who I am today was not fully formed. Right. I just felt uncomfortable. Right. I felt uncomfortable calling anybody infidel. I felt uncomfortable about it. But I still was a little anti-Semitic. Right. Still, I was.
Well, you couldn't not be because you were raised that way. You were indoctrinated to hate.
I knew nothing else.
Yes. So
I used to listen to the mosque sermon every Friday. Okay. At the end of every Friday sermon, it was always, the sheikh would be cursing Jews and Christians. Cursing. when you grow up listening to your
This is what you're hearing today from Iran.
yeah,
it's no
exactly.
different, right?
It's still there. Actually, some of the some of the mosque services inside America today and in Europe are cursing Jews and Israel. It's still happening today.
And I want to talk to you about modern Sharia today and what we're seeing around the world, especially. It's certainly a major point. So, Catholic school, how old were you in Catholic school?
From 8 till I went to college.
Okay, so pretty much your teenage years.
Yes.
And from the time that you entered Catholic school to a British Catholic school, Western values, you were still being taught the Quran, to the time that you went off to college. When you left for college, where were you with your feelings about Israel and Judaism?
My enemy.
Still your enemy at this point?
Oh, yeah.
When did you make that switch? What occurred?
In America.
What occurred?
In America, when I really came to America.
So you came to college in the United States?
No, I went to the American University in Cairo.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
So I graduated college from Cairo, but it was the American University, which was another world. I was from British schools to American education.
Yes.
And it was American education, American professors.
Right.
And that was another exposure to Western values. So I had exposure to Western values. I learned Shakespeare, which is very Unusual for an Egyptian girl to be brought up on Shakespeare.
Right.
And British educational system, and then American. So I had this Western, Middle Eastern, cultural development, and which really made me ready to come to America. Okay. And in America, that's when my real change happened.
So you're now in your 20s, you're in America.
Yeah, in my actually late 20s, I was in America. And then I started working, and then I met, can I go back a little bit?
Sure, of course.
Yeah. Before coming to America, I fell in love with a Coptic Christian man who was a journalist with me, and I was a journalist for a few years after
Big
college.
Target of ISIS in Iraq and in Syria, Coptic Christians.
Yeah, Coptic Christians.
Yes.
Anyway, we couldn't get married because a Muslim girl should never marry a Christian man. So we had to postpone getting married till he had family here in California. And that's how I came to America. I came to America by just coincidence, just because we had to get married, and it was illegal to marry in Egypt a Christian man. But so we came to America, and I started meeting Jewish friends. Actually, I was attracted to some women at my work, and I felt very friendly to them. And I didn't know they were American or Jewish or Christian. And then I kept discovering that I'm attracted to a lot of the Jewish culture and Jewish women. And I started discovering they are not the monsters that we learn to be, they are. And then I went to a synagogue with one of them. I wanted to see who these people are. I had curiosity to discover the truth for myself. So that's, I think, the difference between how I developed was I allowed myself to discover the truth for myself.
You were still practicing Islam, though. You were still, I would consider what, you're a moderate Muslim at this point?
A non-practicing.
Non-practicing.
I was never big on Islam.
Okay.
I pretended, I lived a life of...
So would you say that it wasn't more of a religious perspective on your hatred, but it was more of a cultural indoctrination?
Absolutely.
Okay. I'm thinking here as we're talking about, and we're talking about maybe 30, 40 years ago at this point. The thing is that moderate Islam or moderate Muslims in the United States, you don't hear much from, right? I mean, Islam is what, about a quarter of the world's population, roughly, 22, 23, 24%, depending
Yes.
upon the year that you look at it. Okay, so, and we have a huge population in North America, okay, Canada and the United States. From your perspective, before we get into some of the geopolitics of today, what can be done to encourage these moderate Muslims who are mostly silent to speak out against what, in my mind, and from your perspective and your upbringing, has been a hijacking of the religion by the extremists, by the fundamentalists, the Shiites, whoever it may be?
See, I don't agree that it's hijacking. I don't think Islam was hijacked. I think Islam, any ideology, any religion, is a set of books. We all inherited books.
Okay.
If you're Jewish, you inherited books. If you're Christian, you inherited books. And if you're Muslim, you inherited books. So I judge a religion by what's written in there.
So one of the 5 pillars you refer to is the infidel, and obviously pushes them out to the sea.
Yeah.
Right. That's what you learn.
So I judge Islam not by the people, but by the books. What does Islam say? What's good and bad? How does Islam, the ideology, the doctrine, judge your behavior? Or what does it tell you to do or not to do? So that's how I judge Islam. But the idea that there are some moderate Muslims who are going to save the world from radical Islam, I don't agree to that.
You don't agree to that because why specifically? Is it?
Because
if you take, and I don't mean to interject real quickly here, but if you take a look at the percentages, even though it is a huge number of individuals as far as just as a population base, it is still relatively a minority, right?
The majority of Muslims really are not jihadists. But
correct.
That's normal.
But a majority do believe in some of the tenets of Sharia, some of the base of the polls that I've seen. Is that sympathetic then?
The thing is, any ideology, you have the nucleus, which is the books, the commandments, Sharia law, and then you have a group around it that are very devoted, and then you expand the circle. And that applies to any ideology, any religion. So depending what the circle is, what the center is, what the nucleus is. The nucleus of Islam has values that are opposite to biblical values. And the groups around it, loyal to it, could be very loyal, which are the group that's immediately surrounding it, or at the peripheral. I was probably at the outside of the peripheral when I was a Muslim. So, but they're all around that.
The nucleus, that center, nucleus, and that theology.
Which is the doctrine.
Yeah.
What I call the doctrine.
Now, a lot of people, and politically speaking, let's call them leftists, multiculturalism is the key to bringing people into modernity, right? You see this in Western Europe especially. You've got immigrants coming from North Africa and the Middle East, okay? You see it to a certain extent in certain areas within the United States, some areas of Canada as well. But they're not assimilating. So if you see in England where you have Mayor Khan, okay, they have certain areas of England that I've been to where there are areas where the police just don't go into. Okay.
Yes. Multiculturalism, really, in my opinion, people who truly believe in multiculturalism really don't want anyone to assimilate. They view the world as little pockets of different cultures, and they want them to stay that way. And each one is holding a flag of a different culture and different religion. And why do I say that? Because when I moved to America, I noticed that the left love me just the way I want. Just don't change. And even though I was westernized, I came to America already westernized. But some Americans even ask me, why aren't you wearing your head cover? It's almost like They want to take a picture next to this immigrant with her hijab. And that's what multiculturalists want. Multiculturalists don't want assimilation in their country. They want to make the pockets available to different cultures, and they want us to stay the way we are. They want to love us the way we are. And I don't think they want us to assimilate.
So you realize this when now? You are 20s, you are living in the United States.
I was 29.
You're 29, okay. And you started to realize this. If for a lack of a better term, when did you make that actual pivot, that switch, that ended up labeling you as an apostate or as an infidel?
Oh, it took a long, long time. I did not change. See, cultural change takes a long time to really fully understand who you are. Mm-hmm. It took me a long time. It started with befriending Jewish people, going to a synagogue, sitting in the synagogue and hearing a sermon, thinking that, okay, the rabbi now is going to start insulting Muslims because we insult them in mosques. So I thought that the world is the same in the Jewish religion, that they insult us in their prayer. And then I discovered the rabbi was praying for the whole world, for peace on earth.
Yeah.
And then I was shocked. That's when I started discovering something was wrong with my religion. Mm-hmm. At that time, I never even discovered that something was wrong with my religion, that everybody else was wrong, and Muslims are right. But when I went to a synagogue and a church just to see who these people are, I was shocked that I thought that cursing was normal. Cursing the enemies of Allah was normal. In the Quran, in every chapter of the Quran, the doctrine of Islam discusses in detail the concept of aduwakum wa adu Allah, your enemy and my enemy, is ingrained in the mind of Muslims. That the God of Islam has human enemies. This concept does not exist in the Bible, both Old and New Testament.
Right.
The God of the Bible, the God of the Jews and the God of the Christians, does not have human enemies. Whole groups of people that he calls his personal enemies. The God of Islam has human enemies. He's in a war with human enemies, and he cannot defeat those human enemies except through the hands of his follower Muslims.
Islam would consider what you're saying blasphemy.
No,
this isn't blasphemous against Islam.
No, because this is in the Quran. But the way I'm saying it...
Well, you are saying it in a way which denotes it as a negative, which is an insult.
I'll tell you what.
To the Quran, correct?
Not an insult. No, it's not an insult. Because the word aduwakum wa adu Allah is in the Quran.
Okay.
It's just exactly the same way as Muhammad married a girl who's 6. And he consummated the marriage as 8, 9. They teach that Muhammad... Right. But if you say it from an angle of a biblical view... Critical. That is... being blasphemy applies only if you look at Islam from the angle of a biblical angle.
So if I was to say that it is wrong to marry a 6-year-old and procreate at 9, okay,
exactly,
that is blasphemous.
Exactly. But if you teach it as a story about the life of Muhammad and how great it is, right, and how wonderful it is to marry 11 women,
right,
then that is normal. But the minute you say it from the angle and the point of view of a Bible, that's when it's blasphemy.
Which you've been accused of, correct, in your life? I mean,
Oh, of course.
right. How has that impacted you? I mean, before we sat down here, I was asking, is there a fatwa on you? Is there? I mean, because as an outspoken advocate, for not necessarily anti-Islam, but
No.
just to be critical of the tenets of Islam that you believe are just archaic and
I am against
totalitarian.
Sharia, Islamic
You're against
law.
Sharia.
I'm against Sharia. I'm against the penalty of killing apostates. I'm against the penalty of killing people who insult Islam or criticize Islam, because any religion that has to, we have to start defining what the meaning of religion is. The problem with the West is that whatever people call themselves, this is my religion, we accept it. If you call a certain ideology that you follow a religion, the West accepts it as a right.
Right.
But there were religions that
That's how Scientology still exists.
Yeah, and there are religions in history that did human sacrifice.
Yes.
They killed humans as part of the rituals of religion. So frankly, Islam does that. Part of the ritual of being a good Muslim is to kill the infidels.
So, and correct me if I'm wrong here, okay? Because again, I wasn't raised as a Muslim or in the religion. From what I can see as an outsider, my perspective is that if you are not Islamic and you are critical in any way of Islam,
even if you're Muslim and critical of Islam, it doesn't.
It's against the law.
It's against the law of Sharia.
Yes.
The penalty is execution.
Yes.
Even if you repent. I'm now quoting Sharia books.
Right.
So according to Sharia, Islam is the only religion that has a legal system that equips and obliges any Muslim to kill anyone who criticizes Islam.
Can we talk about how the politics have been impacted by this? Because if you come out and have this discussion today, as you have had now for so long, and it's not necessarily being anti-Muslim, okay?
It's not about people.
Right.
It's not about people.
So what happens in our culture, and this was a huge push right after 9/11, okay, is that if in any way you are critical of Islam, and presidents,
Then
both left and right, have come out.
You hate Muslims.
Okay, you hate Muslims, so you're Islamophobia, or you're xenophobia, okay, you're xenophobic, okay? How has the discussion evolved since, let's say, 2001? Because we're now, 17 years away from this thing, and it doesn't seem like things have evolved.
No, actually, it's getting worse.
How?
It's getting worse because, unfortunately, the left in the West, the far left, and have embraced Islam, in my opinion, they are so anti-Bible that Islam is the tool they choose to use against biblical values.
Okay.
That's very simple. The left, the West, is embracing Islam as a tool to eradicate biblical values.
So I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying here. The tenets of Islam, whether it's Islamism and jihadism, they are putting a priority on over Judeo-Christian values.
Absolutely.
So the secularists in our society, and just again, tell me if I'm wrong by interpreting what you're saying, the secularists in our society, which mostly live on the left or the extreme left, would allow, and we are seeing this in certain European cities as well, allow the fundamentalism, the extremism, okay, to take priority over Judeo-Christian values.
They are embracing the ISIS jihadists who are coming back after from Syria. They're not telling them don't come back. They're taking them back.
Yeah, we've seen this in Canada as well.
Canada's staying back.
Yeah.
The British are taking them back. Some of them, the most radical sheikhs in Egypt escaped to the UK, and Egypt wanted them back to put them on trial, and the UK refused to give them back to Egypt.
Now, going back to the politics here, we have obviously going back and forth between political parties that have been in the White House. President Obama, who many say had sympathies towards Islam, he spoke at the UN during his term, and he actually stated that the future cannot belong to those who slander the Prophet of Islam. You believe
that's Sharia.
That legitimized Sharia law?
Absolutely.
How so?
Because he is condemning that the future does not belong, in my opinion. It means they should be dead. It's almost like you criticize Muhammad, you're dead. Mm-hmm. That's how I saw it. And that scared the hell out of me. Because he was putting Sharia law in a softer way, in a Western language.
That's had an impact. We see that in Western Europe, especially after the Charlie Hebdo massacre, right? If somebody draws the Prophet Muhammad as a cartoon.
They tell you got it to yourself.
Right, it was almost deserved that people were shot to death at work.
Okay, you caused it on yourself.
Okay.
And frankly, in the West, another thing that's really shocking is the West has no sympathy for people who have death sentence from Islam because they left Islam. Where is Western liberals who would sympathize with us who are under a death warrant because we don't want to practice Islam? There was a girl a few years ago, about 8 years ago. Her name was Rifka Berry. She was from a Muslim family, lived in Ohio, and she converted to Christianity secretly. Her father learned about that from the mosque, the neighborhood mosque. And the mosque told the father, which means that the mosque is practically ordering the father to kill her. He threatened the girl with death. She escaped. She escaped to Florida. She was 17. She was still a minor. And there was a whole issue, a lawsuit about bringing her back to her home. And the media, Western media, was so anti that woman, that girl, young girl. They had no sympathy for her. They wanted to drag her back to her father, who threatened to kill her. And some even claimed, some Western journalists wrote articles about her, claiming that this is just a family dispute. So they were echoing what the father was saying. The father was claiming, this is just a family issue here, and I need my daughter to come back home. And eventually the girl never went back home, and she turned 18 anyway, and she remained a Christian. She wrote a book about her experience. There was absolutely no sympathy by the leftists in America to this young girl. I can understand no sympathy to me. I'm a fully grown woman. I'm grandmother. But for a 17-year-old girl, they were fighting her. They were calling her names. Mm-hmm. And when I saw that, I really felt scared.
Nonie, what's the answer to all of this? I mean, you said just a few minutes ago that you think things have gotten worse since 9/11, not better.
Worse.
How do we answer? How does the world answer this? What needs to take place? If you were to sit down and write a screed of what should happen?
I think the left, if they're honest enough, they owe us an explanation. They owe us an explanation on why they are defending Islam, why they are defending the death penalty for apostasy, why they're defending the oppression of women, why are they defending female genital mutilation, why they are not standing on the side on. We are fighting. We are the liberals here.
Right.
We are the people who want
classic liberal.
Yeah, who want the best for women. We are the people who want freedom of religion. I don't want to practice Islam. The left has no sympathy for me to choose not to practice Islam. So this has to be exposed, but nobody's discussing that in our media. Why are feminists of today completely abandoning Middle Eastern women who are, I can understand why, in a way, because there is a large number of Muslim women who are wearing their hijab. Some of them are PhDs in college campuses who are defending Sharia. And they're saying, we're happy to be Muslims. Fine. If they defend these women, that's fine. But defend me too. Defend my right not to be a Muslim woman. Defend my right not to want to wear hijab. Defend my right to reject the penalty of death for apostasy. Defend my right to expose jihad. And they are on the other side completely.
You're seeing a dichotomy. I mean, you refer to professors in colleges and Western universities that come from an Islamic background and have sympathies towards that. We see that in Israel today, and that leads me to my next question for you, because under President Donald Trump, there has been tremendous support. You literally have now squares in Israel being dedicated to President Trump. We didn't see that with Obama. The Iran deal has been withdrawn, and we are now seeing what may come out of that, whether a new deal, a stricter deal, and I want to talk about that as well. But the dichotomy that I'm referring to, you also see in Israel. You see it because Arabs do work in Israel. Arabs do come in, and they are an integral part of the economy there, and people are respectful of each other, right?
Exactly.
But then they go back to their indoctrination, whether it's in Gaza or the West Bank or wherever it may be, Eastern Jerusalem. Okay, talk to me about the dichotomy today, about how we can approach the Arabs, and I, for a lack of a better term, and I keep referring back to this, the moderate Arabs. Okay, because I know a lot of Arabs in Israel like Israel.
Of course.
So I'm referring to the moderates in Israel. They like Israel. They respect Israel, right? They're able to raise their families in relative security. Okay, you refer to them as traitors, or they are referred to as traitors. Is that what you're saying?
If you truly love Israel and are public about it, you become a traitor. But there is a double psychology about Arabs that the West doesn't understand. When I was a Muslim, I could incorporate two opposite views at the same time in my mind and feel perfectly comfortable with it. On the one hand, I love Western freedoms. I love to say I love peace. On the other hand, when somebody goes to go kill the Jews, I look at it as normal. I don't see the conflict here. Unfortunately, a lot of Arabs have that attitude. We were trained for 1400 years to incorporate two opposite ideas at the same time in our mind and feel perfectly comfortable with it. And the West doesn't understand that. For instance, a Palestinian leader or an Arab leader can say that Islam is a religion of peace. We only want peace with Israel. It's they are who don't want peace. We want peace. Okay? You hear them say that. And at the same time, that same leader, in the same day, will turn around, speak to an Arab audience, and say, jihad, 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 go kill the Jews.
Right.
And that same leader feels no conflict whatsoever in what he says. I was like that. And that is a part of the Islamic mind. That's how we were trained, to celebrate wanting to kill Jews, and at the same time, we want to enjoy living in their benefit.
It's almost sociopathic.
Yes. Yeah, I'll give you another example. It doesn't have to be Israel.
Okay.
All these refugees who are coming from Syria and Iraq, they have no place to go. Where did they choose to go? Did they choose to go south to Saudi Arabia to live there? Did they choose to go to the Gulf states? No, the Gulf states closed their doors. We don't want you. And frankly, they don't even want to go there. Where do the Islamic refugees want to go to live? They want to go to live in Western Europe. Not even Eastern Europe. They want to go to the a culture that is based on biblical values, even though they reject the Bible now. But it's still based, the values of their government is still based on biblical values, even though they don't know it. But you see, those Muslims, because I was one of them, so I understand. When I came to America, even though I felt that there was a problem with Islam, I still defended the Palestinians, and I still could sit in a group of people and speak ill about Israel. I did that.
If Islam accepted Israel, which I don't ever see happening,
Then Islam is finished.
it's illegitimate.
If Islam accepts Israel and the truth about Israel and the legitimacy of Israel and the legitimacy of Jerusalem being a Jewish city, if Islam does that, Islam is finished.
You know,
Theologically
speaking, listen, I was in Israel a couple of years ago, and I was very fortunate through some connections that I was there with to receive a tour of tunnels where they're excavating under the first temple, under the Western Wall.
Yeah.
Okay. Now there's areas where a lot of tourists can go. We went deeper than that. It was Indiana Jones Raiders of the Lost Ark. There were scaffoldings and rickety bridges, and it was incredible. And as you go down deep, you see the layers. It's almost like a 7-layer dip. You see the arches, the Muslim.
Yeah, a city built
right?
on a city.
On
built
top
on
of a top of a top of
Yeah.
it. And then you hit bedrock.
Yes.
And the bedrock is the first temple.
Yes.
That was there before the Babylonians and Nebuchadnezzar came in.
Absolutely.
Right? So you are looking at facts. You're looking at history. In
You
fact,
can't hide it.
I carry this around with me, and I may not probably show this on television. This is from the bedrock. This is from the bedrock of the first temple. There is nothing beneath that.
This is what Islam wants to hide.
And so how do you have this debate with people that just say that this doesn't happen, this isn't a fact?
Islam does not want to accommodate anybody. Islam does not want to live in harmony with other ideologies. Islam wants to replace. It wants to take your place. Islam does not want to accommodate other religions. Islam wants to replace them. And
so it's not about living in peace then?
No. See, this is what Islam wants to cover.
Right.
How does it cover?
And it tried to cover it many times,
they
physically.
built on top of it a mosque.
Right.
That's what they did.
Right.
So if you take out the mosque, you'll see the Jews and the Jewish Holy Land. And this tells you Islam as an ideology, really, it wants to replace. It doesn't want to coexist. And this is the nature of Islam. It does not want to coexist.
So how do you wake the again, getting political here again, but this is the reality of our world today. How do you answer the leftists, the multiculturalists today throughout Western Europe, the mayors of London and Birmingham? Listen, I drove through Birmingham about 10 years ago, and on my way to the airport, I actually wrote about this once. On my way to the airport, I stopped for a pint in a pub. I had no idea where I was. I figured it was just a pub. It was England. And I was in, the bartender comes up to me and he says, "You better get out of here, Gov. This is a no-go. You're not welcome." And I look around and there was it was 2:00 on a Thursday, and it was filled with 20-something men, groups of men wearing, football outfits, and they were all staring at me, and I all realized immediately they were all Middle Eastern. Okay.
Was it a pub?
It was a pub. And now it turns out...
Was it serving beer?
Right. There you go. So,
So, see, it's not religion then.
Right, no. It's hatred.
It's hatred.
It's hatred.
So it's not,
they were drinking,
not religion.
That's against the Quran, right?
So it gives you an angle about what Islam is all about. What's the priority of Islam?
So I guess, and I don't think there is an answer to this, but, because you've been an outspoken advocate for years and years on this, to awaken people. Addressing the leftists and the multiculturalists, what can we say to, I hate the term, to make them woke?
Awake, yeah. Well, they won't, because they agree with the basic philosophy of Islam. Islam was created as a rebellion against the Bible. Islam does not want to coexist with the Bible. Mm-hmm. It doesn't want to coexist with biblical values. It feels extremely threatened with Bible and the biblical values. And that's why Jews and Christians were practically almost eliminated from the Middle East. I mean, if you can't see that, there's no way I can convince anybody. Islam was created as a rejection and a rebellion. It's a counter-revolution to the biblical revolution. The biblical ethics revolution was destroyed by Islam in the Middle East. And then it moved to Europe and the West, and now the West has no more, the left in the West no longer cares about their biblical roots. In fact, they want to destroy it. They think they can maintain their level of sophistication, human rights, democracy, equality, all their views about what life should be. They think they can maintain that without the Bible, but they can't.
Last question for you on the Israel issue, and that is, why does half the world, you see it at the UN, it's over half of the UN, support the Palestinians and Hamas?
Yeah, because they respect numbers. Humanity is all about power and numbers. If you get a group of people and one person has a minority view, even though his view is the correct one, most people, the majority of people will gravitate to please the majority. The number of Muslims in the world, number of nations in the world are Muslim. So the United Nations naturally is more controlled by more it's numbers.
We're seeing a tectonic shift happening right now with the Iran deal being withdrawn and whatever new deal comes out of that. Let's call it what it is. Obama couldn't get a treaty. He wouldn't have passed anything through Congress, so he did this deal. And most people, and even Chuck Schumer and others on his side of the aisle, disagreed with it. Okay, but you're seeing a tectonic shift because when the enemy of my enemy. So you have Saudi Arabia and Israel. Mm-hmm. All right, they have a communication going on. You have Jordan. You even have parts of Lebanon, even though it's Sunni controlled mostly and Shiite at the top. But what do you see right now for the future of the Middle East as far as this tectonic shift that is happening with Iran playing that big threat? Mm-hmm. Does that end well for the Middle East?
Well, the Middle East has never been united, and the West took the side mostly of the majority, which was the Sunnis. Mm-hmm. Majority Muslim countries are Sunnis. The majority of the power of Islam and Middle East is in the hands of Sunnis. So we kind of gravitated towards pleasing the Sunnis more than the Shiites, just for numbers. Mm-hmm. But in my opinion, Sunni or Shiite, they all believe in Sharia. But right now, the good thing is that because Saudi Arabia needs the West to defend it against Iran, which is an obviously much stronger nation than Saudi Arabia militarily. Mm-hmm. Militarily, if it wasn't for the United States, the whole Middle East will be Shiites controlled by Iran. Mm-hmm. So because it's a calculation, it's not because suddenly Sunnis and Saudi Arabia are becoming nice to Israel because they love peace suddenly. I think they realize, they calculated everything. We need now America, and we have to close our eyes about Israel because of the threat from Iran. How long this will last, I don't know.
You're starting to see reforms in Saudi Arabia. You're getting women's driver's licenses.
Yeah. The reforms is going to happen for sure because the younger generation in Saudi Arabia have been educated in the West.
Yes.
So I predict that Islam really is an ideology that you cannot live under long enough without turmoil. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And there has to be, if they want to live in peace, they have to take a break from jihad. They know that. So Saudi Arabia now is taking a break from jihad.
And we take a look at where the 9/11 bombers came from, right?
They're all Saudi.
They're all Saudis, and they weren't
Egyptian,
Iranians. And
they're all Sunnis.
Right. And so, exactly. So again, the shifting sands, the tectonic shift. A year ago, President Trump spoke in Saudi Arabia, needed to tour the Middle East, and I think, everybody agreed, even his detractors thought that it was phenomenal. Okay.
Yeah.
There are massive changes that are happening right now with Israel being supported by the United States and a rebonding of that commitment to each other. I think that serves itself well if we are allowing those relationships to develop between Israel and Saudi Arabia and Jordan and other moderate Islamic states.
Absolutely.
So are you optimistic for the future?
A little optimistic. I'm optimistic actually because Islam is hard to survive in this world with radical Islam. It has to collapse. People eventually are people. They want the same thing the West have. Mm-hmm. The people of Egypt.
Does that happen through assimilation then? So your people in Western Europe and.
But the problem is Western Europe is now on the side of pleasing radical Islam. See, Islam is not a system that will eventually bring. If you follow Islam, the doctrine of Islam, you will eventually sacrifice everything for jihad. Mm-hmm. Islam is an ideology that requires sacrificing men for jihad, sacrificing women for jihad, sacrificing children for jihad. Everything is for the glory of the expansion of Islam. That's in the West, it's God, family, country. Islam is not God, Allah, family, country. Islam is jihad, jihad, jihad. Mm-hmm. for the expansion of
I
Islam.
think there's a lot of people in the West that will argue that it's God family country anymore as well.
Exactly.
In the West.
It's exactly because
The families,
the
the government,
the
God's
left
been
is
taken
fighting
out.
God.
Yeah.
The left is fighting family. Is nationalism.
Right.
They're fighting national identity. So that's why they're similar with Islam. The goals of Islam and the goals of the left are similar. And you know what it is similar in what? They want total control of the human mind. That's what they want.
People say that about progressives, and
Yes.
you're seeing that with free speech and the
Yeah,
totalitarian
Islam
approach.
wants total control of human mind,
Right.
and the goal of the left and secularism is to make us all little robots in their world, and they give us a little salaries. We all work for the government, and we all live in similar housing, and they throw a little meat at us, and we're like little animals. We devour it, and we're happy for the government to take care of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're an author. You've had multiple books. Your latest book, Wholly Different, Why I Chose Biblical Value Over Islamic Values. Talk a little bit about the book and where people can find it.
Yeah, I discovered that whenever I was in the presence of Jewish people or in the presence of Christians in synagogues, in churches, over the years it developed, I discovered value. I'm hearing values that are just opposite to what I grew up with. Mm-hmm. For instance, in a church we hear the word, we're all sinners. Mm-hmm. In Islam, no, they are all sinners. We are Muslims. And we're put on this world to fix those sinners, the infidels. So even the idea of looking at who we are we sinners or not, is different.
Right.
Jesus came down to save us. Okay? No, we are supposed to save Allah and Muhammad's reputation by killing anybody who criticizes them. You see the burden a Muslim is carrying from his theology?
It's almost mafioso.
Yeah. We are put on this earth to protect the reputation of Allah and Muhammad.
Yeah.
By killing anybody who's their enemies, their human enemies on earth. Allah has human enemies on earth, and my role as a Muslim is to kill his enemies on earth. That's a difference in philosophy. The Bible says that we have to change ourselves. In Islam, the ideology tells us to change others.
Right.
So the value system of the Bible, Jews or Christian, is to change oneself. And if everybody changes oneself, we're going to all be better people. That's not how Islam looks at humanity. Islam tells us to change others. Focus on changing others, not focus on changing ourselves. So when I saw all these major vengeance is mine, that's a biblical values. Be good to your neighbors, Mm-hmm. Vengeance in the Quran, this is a Quran verse. Vengeance have been prescribed for you by God. Which means that the God of Islam, Allah, abdicated his role to avenge to his people, to his followers, to Muslims, to do vengeance on his behalf. Totally opposite value from the Bible. So a Muslim is burdened by carrying Allah's commandment to do vengeance on his behalf.
Oh, it sounds like a fascinating read. I'm gonna have to. Where would people find it?
It's everywhere. It's in
Amazon.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll put a link up with the episode so people can find it.
Yes, wholly different. Actually, I got excellent reviews, and people even told me, after reading your book, we even like being Christians and Jews more. I got it from both Jews and Christians.
Interesting.
Yeah, we now appreciate being Jewish.
Yeah.
And I discovered, actually, towards the middle of writing the book, that, oh my God, Islam violated all the 10 commandments. Don't kill, but you can kill in such a... Don't steal, but you can take the property of the enemies of Allah. Right. Don't lie, but you can lie. Don't. Everything is allowed to the jihadist.
I noticed that you have a Twitter account. Is that the Nonie Darwish?
Yes.
At Twitter, or on Twitter, at
yes.
the Nonie Darwish?
Yeah.
Where else can people find you?
On Facebook.
Okay.
You can reach me, my email, Nonie@ArabsForIsrael.com.
And you do a lot of speaking engagements. You were just telling me that you were doing a local speaking engagement recently.
Yeah, I speak. I'm one of the few people who still speaks on college campuses.
Wow. What's the reaction been to that?
Most of the kids who invite me are either Jewish groups or Republican groups.
Okay.
And they are really in need of a voice like mine.
But you have the the Muslim Student Union showing up?
Sometimes they come and...
They're very vocal.
They're very vocal.
Yes.
But lately, frankly, I have spoken in 2 colleges recently. And a couple of times, some Muslims were sitting, and I choose them first in the question and answer period. Mm-hmm. And I'm very happy to be asked challenging questions.
Okay.
And some of them come and tell me, thank you, I agree with what you say.
Good. Well, we need more people like you out there speaking to this issue. It is a major issue. It isn't just religious, it's cultural and political. And, I think the more people that are speaking out about this type of situation, it's better for the world and for peace, which is, I think you would agree, we would all agree that we want.
Absolutely. And culture, religious, and political are we're not one block. I mean, it's intertwined.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the West is changing fast, Islam is changing fast. And I know that God is working. Is working.
Yeah. Nonie Darwish, thank you so much for having us. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
My pleasure.
And folks, you can find us at whiskeypolitics.net. You will be able to listen to this episode on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, obviously always at ricochet.com. And you'll be able to see this on YouTube and America's Voice Television Network. Until next time, thanks for joining us. I'm Dave Sussman with Whiskey Politics.